The distress beacon had been transmitting for 14 hours before anyone admitted it was not going to be answered. Rails stood in the dark of the observation deck and watched the stars. They did not move. They never moved. That was the thing about dying in deep space. Nothing around you changed. The universe did not notice. The cold came slowly, the oxygen thinned slowly, and the stars kept burning the same as they always had. Behind him, the voice of a cord groaned. Not a dramatic sound, just the soft metallic settling of a ship that had stopped pretending its systems were fine. The emergency lighting had dropped to half an hour ago. The corridor outside the observation deck was the color of old blood. Physician Sona found him there. She did not say anything at first. She stood beside him and looked at the same stars and let the silence sit between them the way it needed to. Then she said, 31 hours. I recalculated after the secondary coupling failed. He nodded. They had been given 41 hours that morning. They had lost 10 to a failure no one predicted in a system that was not supposed to be critical on a ship that had passed its last inspection without a single flag. That was the other thing about dying in deep space. It was rarely one large thing. It was always several small things arriving together. The pods, Sona said. No, Rail said. Rail's single-person emergency pods with no propulsion beyond initial burn. We are 11 light towers from the nearest relay beacon. The pods have life support for 60 hours. He said it the way he had already said it to himself many times in the last 14 hours. We scatter, we die alone, we stay, we die together, and there is at least a record of where we were. Sona did not argue. She was a physician. She understood the difference between a choice and an absence of choices. What she said instead was, Admiral Set's response came in 2 hours ago. I did not want to tell you until I had the recalculation. Rail already knew what the response was. He had known before it arrived. He had written enough strategic assessments in his career to understand the arithmetic. 3 warships diverted from the patrol corridor meant 6 days of strategic exposure in a zone that 3 separate Allied governments were currently watching. Against that, 1 diplomatic vessel, 11 crew, 1 mission that had already concluded. The math was not complicated. He listed us as lost, Rail said. Yes, Rail turned away from the stars. The observation deck was small, barely 4 mid across, a luxury addition to a diplomatic vessel that was supposed to make long transits feel less confining. He had never used it before today. He had always been too busy. He sat down on the curved bench along the hall and folded his hands and thought about what he wanted his final transmission to contain, not anger. Anger would be easy and it would be wrong. Set had made a defensible decision. The institution would survive. The corridor would remain secured. 14 other ships would continue their work without the drag of a costly rescue operation. He understood it. That was the thing that sat heaviest in him. Not betrayal, but comprehension. He had spent 30 years learning to think like an institution. He was very good at it. And so he understood exactly why he was going to die out here, and he could not find it in himself to call it wrong. He was still composing the transmissions when Sona appeared in the doorway. Her face was different, not the careful medical neutral she had worn all day. Something uncertain. There is a signal, she said, not fleet, not military. It came in on the open emergency band standard human commercial frequency. Rail looked at her. A cargo hauler, she said, called the Resolute. They picked up our automated beacon. She paused. They are 12 hours away. They say they are turning around. The room did not change. The stars did not move. The emergency lighting stayed its dim red-brown. Rail sat with that for a moment that felt longer than it was. A cargo hauler, a commercial vessel with no military charter, no rescue mandate, no government directive, 12 hours out, which meant they had already been traveling away from this position, which meant turning around cost them something. They had heard a beacon in the dark and they had changed course. Did they state terms? Rail asked. Sona shook her head slowly. They asked how many crew we have. Rail stood up. He crossed to the small communication panel on the wall of the observation deck and looked at the open channel blinking there. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that Sona said his name once quietly. He pressed the panel open. "This is Senior Diplomat Rail of the Calvary vessel Voice of Accord," he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "We have 11 crew, 3 with minor injuries, 1 with a fractured limb, none critical at this time. Our docking collar is intact. Our life support is functional but declining." He stopped. "Then to whom am I speaking?" "Captain Darosai, Resolute out of Heron Station." The voice was human, a woman's unhurried. "We'll be there in 11 hours and 40 minutes. Keep that collar intact for us." Rail stood in the dim red light of his dying ship and stared at the speaker long after the channel went quiet. He had no word for what was forming inside him, not in any of the 6 languages he spoke. He had understood completely why his own fleet had left him to die. He did not understand why a stranger was coming back. Sona pulled up everything she could find on the Resolute, using the ship's damaged database, and what she found was deeply unimpressive. She read it twice, then brought it to Rail as if she expected him to see something she had missed. "Read it carefully. The Resolute was a Hera-class mid-range cargo hauler, 14 years in service, currently registered out of Heron Station in human space, 11 crew licensed for commercial transit across 7 standard freight corridors, no military classification, no government rescue contract. Its last 3 cargo entries were machine components, agricultural processing equipment, and something listed in the manifest as miscellaneous dry goods. Its safety record was clean, its debt record was not. They are in financial difficulty," Rail said, "which means they definitely cannot afford to lose a delivery window," Sona said, and yet, she agreed. Rail set down the datasheet and opened the channel to the Resolute. He had spent 30 years as a diplomat. He knew how to begin a negotiation from a weak position, how to structure a conversation so that the other party named their price first, how to make an offer feel like a gift. He was not without tools. "Captain Oe," he said, "I want to address the matter of compensation." There was the signal delay, then her voice flat and businesslike. "What about it?" "You are diverting from your delivery route. I understand this creates losses. I want to be clear that the Kelvari government will make full restitution, cargo value, transit fees, any secondary penalties from your missed contract. Additionally, I have the authority to offer you priority docking access at 3 Calvary stations for a period of 5 years. That is not a trivial offer." He waited. "Noted." Dara said, "How's your docking collar holding?" Rail blinked. "It is intact. Good. We'll want to run a pressure test on approach. My engineer needs your collar spec. Can your system still transmit a technical file?" "Yes" button. "Can you have it to us in the next 2 hours?" "We're working on an adapter, and the sooner we have the spec, the better." Rail looked at Sona. She was watching him with an expression he did not entirely like. "I can have it sent within 30 minutes, he said. "Perfect. Anything else?" He found himself asking it before he planned to. "Do you not want to discuss terms?" The pause was shorter than the signal delay required. "I heard your offer. It's generous. We can sort the details after everyone's alive. Right now, I need that spec file." The channel closed. Sona said nothing. She wanted to pull the technical files from the engineering station. Rail sat with the open communication panel and felt something he recognized eventually as the specific discomfort of having prepared for a conversation that did not happen. He had expected a negotiation. He had expected the human captain to understand leverage. She was in a position of advantage. He needed her. She did not need him, and she had not used it. She had asked about a collar specification. He could not work out whether she was very clever or whether she genuinely did not care about the terms. Meanwhile, on the Resolute, Yusuf had already been awake for 22 hours. He did not particularly notice. He had the collar spec, now spread across his workbench in the engineering bay, and he was cross-referencing it against the Resolute's docking system with the focused quiet of a man who found problems more interesting than sleep. The two collar standards were different in 11 key dimensions. 4 of those differences were cosmetic. 7 were structural. Of the 7, 3 were genuinely difficult. His assistant, a young crew member named Bryce, watched him work and said, "Is this actually possible?" "I don't know yet," Yusuf said. "That's not a great answer." "The other answer is no, and I don't want to use that one until I have to." He flipped to the next sheet. "Hand me the ring clamps." In the forward cargo bay, 3 other crew members were already clearing space. Nobody had told them to. Lena had mentioned at dinner that they'd need room for 11 Kelvari, and by the time dinner was done, people were moving crates. The bay was cramped, and the gravity plating in the far corner ran slightly warm. But someone had found extra insulation panels, and someone else had located 4 spare bunk frames in storage. And the work was just happening the way work happened on a small ship. Without a meeting, without a plan, without anyone needing to say the obvious out loud, Dara walked through the bay on her way back from the bridge. She stopped and looked at what was happening. "You've got the corner unit running at 31C, she said. "I know," said Wren, who was bolting down the last bunk frame. "Kelvari run warm." I looked it up. Doctor looked at her for a moment. Then she went back to the bridge. She did not thank her. The work did not require thanks. It required someone to notice the temperature, and someone to look it up, and someone to do the bolting. And all 3 of those things had happened without her, which was the only measurement of crew she had ever trusted. On the voice of Accord, the second oxygen reserve began its quiet decline. Rail sat in the dim light of his quarters and composed a message to his family. Not a farewell, just a message, ordinary and overdue, and then stopped halfway through and did not finish it. He found he did not want to write, as though he was going to die. He was not sure for the first time in 14 hours that he was. The first adapter failed in under 4 minutes. Yusuf watched the pressure test reading drop and made a single note on his sheet, then went back to the bench. Bryce started to say something. Yusuf said, "Second attempt." And Bryce stopped talking and handed him tools. They were working in parallel with PV, the Kelvari engineer on the voice of Accord over an open channel. PV had been awake longer than any of them. His voice had the flat, over-controlled quality of someone who had already been afraid for many hours and had nothing left to spend on it. The collaboration was strange at first. Not hostile, strange. Kelvari engineering used a base 12 measurement notation. Human standard was based in the conversion, was simple enough, but in the middle of the night cycle, working fast P caught a conversion error in Yusuf's 4th drawing that would have misaligned the secondary lock ring by 3 mm, enough to cause a slow pressure bleed they might not notice until the transfer was half done. Said, "I have been watching your notation carefully." Perv said, "Good. Keep doing that." A pause. "You're good at this." Perv was quiet for a moment. "You are also good at this," he said, as if trying out a phrase in an unfamiliar language. The second adapter failed too. The third held pressure for 11 minutes before the clamp ring slipped. You sat with the third failure for a while and then said quietly to no one in particular, "We're fighting the wrong problem." Bryce looked up. "We keep trying to make the collars identical." Yusuf said, "They're not identical. They don't need to be identical. They need to hold pressure and not separate under transfer stress." He pulled a blank sheet. "PV, I'm going to walk you through a different approach. Tell me the tensile rating on your outer hole ring." The 4th design was not elegant. It was 3 standard clamp assemblies, a pressure bridge Yusuf improvised from a coolant coupling, and 2 sections of emergency sealant foam that he was fairly certain was rated for internal use only and was hopping would not matter. It took 4 hours to build from parts already on the ship. It held for the full test cycle. It held when they tested it again. Yusef transmitted the design to Parav and said, "Have your best technician ready at the collar on your end. When we dock, we'll have about 8 minutes to get the bridge seated before we lose the test pressure advantage from the residual sealant cure." "That's 8 minutes, not 10. "Understood," Perf said. "Then you want to ask something. Go ahead." "Why is your captain doing this?" Asef was quiet for a moment. He set down the clamp he was checking and thought about it the way he thought about engineering problems, honestly, without shortcuts. "She heard the beacon," he said finally. "That is not an answer. It's the whole answer." Yusef said she heard it and she could not turn around. That's just how she is. He picked up the clamp again. "Make sure your technician has good gloves. The outer collar is going to be cold." The Resolute came in slow, the way you approached a ship with no maneuvering capacity and a crew that had been breathing thin air for 20 hours. Dar handled the final approach herself, which was not unusual. What was unusual was how quiet the bridge was. Not tense, just focused. Everyone doing exactly their job and nothing else. Rail watched through the observation deck as the Resolute grew from a distant light to a shape and then to a ship, and then to something large enough to block out the stars on one side. It was not a beautiful vessel. It was blunt and worn, covered in the small dents and discolorations of years of hard use. The cargo markings along its hull were faded. One of its running lights was slightly off color from a replacement that did not quite match. He had his career been received aboard fleets of vessels and diplomatic cruisers and 2 different station palaces. He had never been so relieved to see anything in his life as that ugly, battered det carrying cargo hauler filling up his window. The docking took 11 minutes. The collar adapter held. When the pressure bridge seated and the seal confirmed and the inner door opened, Rail was standing at the front of his crew. He had prepared something to say. Not much, but something, a recognition of the debt, a formal acknowledgement. Dara Oy came through the door first and she looked at him and said, "Anyone need immediate medical?" Rail said, "One crew member fractured limb kept stable. The others are my medics right behind me." She was already looking past him at the corridor, reading the ship the way you read a space that might give you problems. "The transfer passage is cold and we need to move fast. Can your injured member move with support?" "Yes, then let's get everyone across. We can do introductions on the other side." It was not what he had prepared for. He stepped aside. His crew began moving. Sona passed him in the corridor and murmured without stopping, "I like her." Rail watched Doctor direct the transfer with the calm efficiency of someone unloading cargo, except she was looking at every face that came through, checking each one, making sure each person who stepped into the passage was going to make it to the other side. He thought of all the speeches he had ready and said none of them. He followed his crew through the door. The young navigation aide's name was Tev, and he stopped breathing in the transfer corridor. It happened quietly. One moment he was walking slow and supported, and the next he was on the floor of a passage that was barely wide enough for 2 people, side by side in near vacuum cold, with the sealant foam adapter creaking somewhere above them. The Resolute's medic, a compact, gray-haired woman named Adri, was at his side before anyone else had processed what was happening. Sona moved to help without being asked. What followed was not like the medical procedure Sona had trained in. Kalvari medicine was structured, systematic with clear escalation protocols and defined role boundaries. Adri did not appear to have role boundaries. She was doing 3 things at once, narrating none of them, using supply kits that were not regulation-sized and had clearly been restocked by hand over many years with whatever worked. She asked Sona for things in a mix of technical terms and shorthand that Sona had to translate on the fly. She did not wait for confirmation before acting. She did not ask if Sona agreed. She simply moved and expected Sona to move with her. They worked on Tay for 38 minutes in that corridor. He came back slowly, pulse first, then color, then a sharp intake of breath that echoed off the walls in a way that made several people in the nearby passage go very still. Adri sat back on her heels and said, "Okay, we've got you." Not to anyone, just to the air. Then she looked at Sona and said, "Good hands." Sona did not know what to say to that. She said, "Thank you for moving fast." "That's the only way to move," Adri said, and started packing her kit. The Resolute was not built for guests. The forward cargo bay had been rearranged, and there were bunk frames that had clearly come out of storage recently, and the temperature was warmer than the rest of the ship in a way that felt deliberate. Rail stood in the entrance to the bay and looked at what the crew had done. The cleared space, the bedding, the small table with water containers and food packages that were not Kelvari in origin but were edible. He was fairly sure and tried to find the transaction in it. There was no transaction. Someone had just done it. He noticed the crew moving around each other in the tight corridors, the humans going one way, the Kelvari learning to navigate the layout, small adjustments made on both sides without discussion. A human crew member, whose name he did not yet know, pointed Rail's youngest aide in the direction of the water recycler without being asked. PV and Isef were already somewhere in the engineering bay, apparently unable to stop talking about the adapter design. The ship smelled like recycled air and machine oil. The lighting was slightly too bright for Kelvari comfort. The gravity was set 2 points below Kelvari standard. These things were true, and Rail noticed them, and they did not matter at all. He found Dar in the small galley off the main corridor, drinking something from a metal container and reviewing a transit chart. She looked up when he came in. She did not stand on a diplomatic vessel. He would have noted that here snorts, it did not register as anything except honest. "Your crew member is stable," she said. "Adri will watch him. I know I came to say I'm not sure what I came to say." He stopped. "I have formal expressions for this in 6 languages. None of them feel right." Dara looked at him for a moment. "You're alive," she said. "That's the main thing. You lost your delivery window. Yes, you will be penalized. Probably. And you?" He stopped again. He was a man who did not run out of words. He was running out of words. "You did not hesitate. Your crew did not hesitate. I have been trying to find the reason since the moment you answered our beacon, and I cannot locate it." Doctor set down her container. She looked at the transit chart for a moment, as if deciding whether to say something simple or something true. "I was 8 years old," she said. "A ship I was on had a bad system fire. Not a catastrophic one, but bad. We had to shelter in the forward section for 11 hours waiting on a response ship." She paused. The response ship came. It was not fast, but it came, and the crew of that ship gave us their food and their spare bunks. And I remember being 8 years old and knowing in some place that does not use words that the whole thing worked because people turned around. She picked up her container again. "That's the whole reason. I'm sorry if it's not very interesting." Rail was quiet for a moment. "It is not uninteresting," he said. He sat across from her at the small galley table, and for the first time since the micrometeorite had struck his fuel coupling, he felt the tension in his chest begin to release. Not fully, but enough. They sat in silence that was not uncomfortable. 2 people on a worn-out cargo hauler, 3 days from the nearest station with 11 extra lives aboard, and a financial penalty already accumulating, and an engineering conversation going too long in the bay below. Outside, the stars did not move. They never moved. But for the first time in 24 hours, Rail did not mind. The message from Admiral Set arrived 18 hours into the transit. It was encoded, private, and addressed to Rail alone. He read it in his borrowed bunk in the cargo bay on a small handheld device, while the rest of his crew slept around him in the dim warmth of a human ship that had made room for them. The message was 4 lines long. It told him a Kelvari fleet response vessel had been dispatched to recover sensitive diplomatic materials from the voice of Accord before its orbit degraded. It told him the vessel was not equipped for passenger transfer. It told him to hold a full account of the incident until he was back on Kelvari soil, where it could be properly reviewed and contextualized. The last line said, "The circumstances of the fleet response decision are sensitive in nature and should not be shared with non-Kelvari parties." Rail read it twice. Then he put the device face down on his chest and stared at the ceiling of the cargo bay, which had a small patch of weld repair in one corner that someone had painted over in slightly the wrong color. He had spent his career understanding messages like this one. He knew what properly reviewed and contextualized meant. It meant shaped. It meant a version of events in which the fleet had made a reasonable decision under pressure, and a fortunate commercial encounter had provided an unexpected solution. It meant no difficult questions about who had been listening to a distress beacon and what they had decided to do about it. He understood why Set sent. He was not sure anymore that understanding something was the same as accepting it. In the morning, by the ship's clock, he went to find Dara. She was on the bridge running a routine diagnostic that she appeared to be running mostly out of habit. Lena was at the navigation station. Neither of them said anything when Rail came in. He had learned in 2 days that the Resolute's crew operated in a comfortable silence that did not require explanation. "There is something you need to know," Rail said. Doctor turned from the diagnostic. She read his face the way she had been reading situations since she was 8 years old, efficiently and without drama. "Tell me," she said. He told her all of it. The fleet's response, the message, the instruction not to speak to non-Kelvari parties. Lena at the navigation station went very still in the careful way of someone who is listening and does not want you to notice. Drucker listened until he was done. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to know if you are angry." She thought about that a little, she said, "but not the kind that needs doing something with right now." She tilted her head slightly. "You told me anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Rail looked at the viewport. The stars were the same stars they always were. "Because you turned around," he said. "Because your crew gave up their bunks. Because a woman I had never met worked on my crew member for 38 minutes in a cold corridor and did not stop until he was breathing." He turned back to her. "What your fleet did or did not do is a different question, but I will not let what this ship did disappear into a contextual review." Dara nodded once slowly. When the Kelvari response vessel appeared on long-range sensors 4 hours later, Rail was the one who answered the hail. Admiral Set's voice was exactly as he remembered it, precise, controlled, the voice of a man who had made 1,000 difficult decisions and stopped feeling them years ago. "Diplomat Rail, we are glad you survived." "Thank you. Admiral, we will retrieve the materials from the voice of Accord and then proceed." "I understand you have been well treated by the human vessel, very well treated," Rail said. "I intend to say so publicly with full detail. A pause not long that will require review before. I have prepared a complete account, timestamps, communication logs, names of crew members aboard the Resolute. It will be transmitted to the diplomatic office upon my arrival." Rail's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I want to be clear that I am not doing this to create difficulty. I am doing it because the record should be accurate." Another pause. "Your career." "I know," Rail said. The channel closed. Lena behind him let out a slow breath. The response vessel took the materials from the wreck and left without further communication. It did not offer to transfer the crew. Doctor watched it go from the bridge and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. Then she turned back to her diagnostic and said casually to the room, "Lena, adjust our ETA. We'll push speed a little." "Get everyone home faster," Lena said, already done, and did not look up. In the cargo bay, Sona was sitting with Tev, who was awake and eating something from a human food container with the careful experimental attention of someone trying a new experience and not yet sure what to make of it. He looked up when she came back. "What happened on the bridge?" he asked. Rail was diplomatic, she said. T looked uncertain about whether that was good or bad. "It was good," Sona said. "It was very good." She sat down beside him and did not explain further. Some things, she had decided, were easier to understand once you were alive and on the other side of them. Outside, the Resolute pushed on through the dark. 3 days on a cargo hauler taught Rail things that 30 years of diplomacy had not. He learned that Isef sang while he worked. Not for anyone, not loudly, just a low, steady sound that filled the engineering bay. The way background hum filled a ship, constant and unnoticed until it stopped. He learned that Lena kept a small C notebook of navigation notes, even though every calculation ran through the ship's computer, because she said she thought better when her hand was moving. He learned that Ren, the crew member who had adjusted the cargo bay temperature for Kelvari physiology, had done so entirely on her own initiative and did not consider this remarkable. He learned that on the Resolute, dinner was the one time everyone stopped. Not by rule, not by schedule, just by habit, by years of living in a tight space together, and understanding that meals were the seam where the day's work ended and the people came back. The Kelvari crew joined on the second night. The table was not large enough. People sat on crates and storage lids, and nobody mentioned it. Perv and Isef were still talking about the adapter. Sona and Adri were comparing medication storage methods. Tev was sitting very upright at the edge of the table, with the particular focus of someone who was listening to everything and not sure how to participate. And at some point, Ren said something to him. Rail did not hear what, and Tev laughed and looked surprised that he had. Rail watched all of this and tried to find the word for it. On the third morning, Lena announced they were 6 hours from Heron Station and asked both crews if they had anything to say before they crossed into comms range. It was a small ritual the Resolute's crew had invented for long transits. The practice of saying the thing you wanted to say while there was still quiet to say it in. Rail's senior aide, Fiane, said he wanted to thank the crew for the food and for the extra blanket, and for not making them feel like they were in the way because they were clearly in the way, and no one had made them feel it. Several of the humans looked like they did not know what to do with this. Adri said, "You weren't in the way." Fane said, "We were in the way." Adris said, "Fine, yes, but it was fine." The laughter that followed was not large, but it was real, and it crossed whatever it was that usually sat between two species who did not know each other. When the ritual was done, Rail went to find Dara one more time. She was where she usually was when she was not on the bridge in the small space between the galley and the engine room access, leaning against the wall with her transit documents, reviewing things that did not urgently require review because it was how she settled her mind. He had figured this out by the second day. He stood across from her and said, "I have been trying for 3 days to understand you." She looked up. "Not you personally," he said, "the shape of what you did, the mechanism of it. I keep looking for the belief system underneath it, the philosophy, the training. We have traditions in Kelvari culture about duty and sacrifice, and they are built on centuries of thought. I keep trying to find the equivalent in what you did, and I cannot locate it." Doctor folded her documents. She thought about it the way she always thought about things directly without performance. "I don't think there's a philosophy," she said. "I think it's more like when you hear something dying out in the dark, you feel it somewhere in your chest before your brain starts working, and the only way to make the feeling stop is to go." "That is not a reason," Rail said. "No," she said, "it isn't." He was quiet for a moment. For the Kelvari, a reason is what makes an action legitimate. Without a reason, an action has no structure. It cannot be passed on or taught or built into a system. "I know," Dara said. "That seems like a hard way to live." Rail opened his mouth and then did not speak for a long time. The ship moved around them, humming and settling, doing what it had always done. "When my government issues its account of this incident," he said finally, It will contain reasons, diplomatic value, interspecies relations, the benefit of positive precedent. They will make it make sense in the way that my culture requires sense. Okay, Dara said. But the real account, Rael said, is that you heard us and you could not leave us alone. She nodded. I will not lose that, he said, whatever they write. Her Naren station appeared on the forward sensors at hour 5. By hour 6, it had grown into a lit and busy place where ships docked and ordinary life continued without interruption. The Resolute came in quiet and without announcement, the way it always did. On the dock, after the Calvari crew had been met by their government representatives, and the paperwork had begun, and the noise of arrival had swallowed everything, Tev stood at the edge of the docking ring and looked back at the Resolute. He had been asking Sona for 3 days why the humans came back. She had not given him a satisfying answer. He looked at the ship, worn, unglamorous, already being reloaded for its next run, and thought that maybe the question was not the right question. Maybe the right question was what kind of thing you became if you heard that silence and kept flying forward. He was glad he did not have to find out.